$1 million, one bullet, and the man sworn to protect President Traoré pulled the trigger. But in a nation torn by injustice and racial divide, was it betrayal or the beginning of redemption? What makes a soldier choose his soul over survival? The sun scorched the sky like a punishment suspended at its zenith, casting no shadows, only heat waves that shimmered above the red dust highway, leading out of Ouagadougou, capital of a nation, carved by conflict stitched together by fragile hope. A convoy of 6 gleaming black SUVs sliced through the shimmering heat, their bulletproof glass glinting like obsidian under the oppressive sun. Each vehicle moved with ghostly synchronization tires, grinding the clay beneath them into clouds of fine red mist. On either side of the road, rows of villagers had gathered, pressed shoulder to shoulder behind makeshift barriers of rope, and sticks craning necks waving sun-bleached flags, cheering with a kind of desperate joy. At the center of the convoy in the third vehicle sat President Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it held weight. Now, as his SUV slowed slightly, he raised a hand in calm, regal salute. The crowd roared. A child on his father's shoulders waved a crumpled piece of cardboard painted with the words, "Unity lives with you, Traoré." The president's eyes flicked toward it, just briefly, his lips curving upward, not in triumph, but in recognition. Inside the vehicle, the air conditioning hummed softly, a fragile cocoon against the furnace outside. Traoré's suit clung to him with the precision of a military uniform, though it bore no medals, only sweat at the collar and a creased photo tucked in his breast pocket, a younger version of himself and another man, arms around each other, uniforms dusted with war. Then everything shattered. A thunderous crack tore the air apart, louder than the engine roar, sharper than any cheer. A shotgun blast, and for a second time stopped. The shot echoed like a curse spoken aloud. The sound bounced off termite mounds in the distance and threw itself across the convoy like a sonic whip. The SUV behind the president swerved violently. Tires screamed. A guard's helmet exploded like glass struck with a hammer. Chaos unfolded in a blink. Agents dived from open doors, shouting into earpieces, automatic weapons drawn and raised like steel flowers blooming in the heat. One bodyguard, Corporal Diarra, slammed into the earth blood, misting the red dust, limbs twitching. Screams erupted from the crowd. Some ran. Others froze, filming. One child dropped his flag and screamed for his mother. Inside the SUV, Traoré did not flinch. Instead, his eyes narrowed, scanning through the tinted windshield, parsing the angles. He moved with the fluid instinct of a soldier, not a politician. He didn't wait for orders. He gave them. In a single controlled movement, Traoré pushed open the SUV door, swung his legs out, and landed. Crouched in the dust, an action born from muscle memory, not protocol. His hand reached toward his waist. Empty, no pistol. His gaze swept the scene and then locked on something, no someone. A figure emerged from behind a tree stump, close, too close. Familiar gait, familiar stance. A face he knew better than his own reflection. The shotgun still smoking in that man's trembling hands. The air went still again, just for a moment. Traoré's boots sank into the dust as he stood. Moussa, his protector, his shadow, his brother in arms, and the man holding the gun that should have killed him. From the corner of his vision, Traoré caught movement. Agents were closing in, fingers on triggers, faces hard with duty and confusion. He raised a hand sharply. They stopped. Everyone froze in place as if the desert itself were holding its breath. What no one could answer, not yet, was why. Why had Moussa Kabori, the man who'd once taken a bullet for Traoré, now pulled a trigger aimed at his head? And more importantly, why had he missed? Was it a mistake or mercy? Traoré took one step forward. Moussa didn't run. He just stood there, gun still raised, but eyes full of something no one expected: shame. The dust hadn't even settled. Screams still echoed across the scorched air as agents closed in, surrounding the figure, who now stood motionless, shotgun limp in hand, like it no longer had a purpose. Behind him, the tree bark was splintered from the recoil, and beneath his boots, the red earth drank in drops of sweat. Corporal Moussa Kabore. He didn't resist. No second shot. No attempt to run. No panic. He simply lowered the weapon slowly, as if the weight had finally become too much to carry, and let it fall into the dust with a dull final thud. Within seconds, agents rushed him, 3 in front, 2 behind. Musa was slammed to the ground with brutal efficiency, a boot on the back of his neck, arms wrenched behind, zip ties biting into his wrists. But not once did he cry out. Not once did he fight back. Traoré stood still, breathing shallowly, dust clinging to the sweat on his face. His gaze never left Musa, not for a second. Around him, voices shouted commands, civilians scattered, another gun was drawn, but he heard none of it. He stepped forward. The agents hesitated, then made way. Traoré crouched beside the pinned man, the man he had once called brother in blood and battle. Musa's cheek was pressed into the dirt, but his eyes slowly turned upward. Their eyes met. Not rage, not fear, just heartbreak. Traoré whispered so quietly that only Musa could hear it, though the air seemed to hold its breath to listen. Why, brother Musa's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Only breath, a blink, a flicker of something deep in buried remorse, resignation. And then Traoré noticed something that made his pulse catch. The shot had missed. Not by much, but enough. It had shattered the armored panel behind him, not pierced the glass, not touched a soul, a calculated angle, close enough to shock, not to kill. A warning, a hesitation, or mercy. The agents around them looked to each other uncertain. This wasn't a clean case of attempted assassination. The blast had hit no vital target. The shooter had stayed. He had dropped the weapon. He hadn't even tried to explain. It didn't make sense. One of the officers stepped forward, sidearm trembling slightly in his grasp. Orders, Mr. President, everyone expected the word. Execute, eliminate the traitor, end the threat. But it didn't come. Traoré stood slowly, his shadow falling over the man in the dirt. His hand raised not to strike, but to stop. No one shoots. Not another bullet. The crowd had gone eerily silent now, watching from behind burned-out tires and market carts. Phones still recording, children still crying. One nation holding its breath, waiting to see how its leader would respond to betrayal at point-blank range. Traoré's voice was clear, unwavering. Arrest him. No harm. A ripple of disbelief moved through the agents, but the command was final. Musa was hauled to his feet, dust-streaked, bruised but alive. As he was led past Traoré, their eyes locked once more. Still no explanation. Still no answer. But deep in the folds of Musa's silence, there was something unfinished, something that hadn't died in that shot. And in the distance, unnoticed by most, a small gust of wind lifted the child's cardboard sign that had fallen earlier. It fluttered briefly in the air before landing face up in the dirt beside a spent shell casing. Unity lives with you, Traoré. But unity, it seemed, had just taken a bullet from the hand of its protector, and no one yet knew why. By nightfall, the headlines had already gone global. Assassination attempt on President Traoré by his own bodyguard. Shock in Ouagadougou, one motive or personal vendetta. Loyalist or traitor, the mystery of Corporal Musa Kabori. News anchors shouted across flashing tickers. International outlets scrambled to identify the shooter, only to uncover an even more startling twist. He wasn't a rogue gunman, nor a member of the opposition, but one of the president's most trusted inner circle. Images circulated, grainy footage captured by cell phones of Traoré stepping calmly from his SUV, facing down the shooter and stopping his own agents from pulling the trigger. The photo of him standing before a tied, bruised Musa with eyes full of heartbreak and restraint flooded social media like a storm tide. Pundits called it unprecedented. Foreign embassies issued statements of concern, though most were carefully worded, walking the tightrope between diplomacy and alarm. Behind closed doors, Western operatives tightened security, wondering if the attempt had deeper roots. A coup in slow motion, perhaps. Yet curiously, the opposition remained silent. No press conference, no condemnation, no celebration. As if they too were stunned or afraid. Back at the presidential compound, the mood was quieter but tenser. Musa Kabor was not taken to prison, nor paraded before the cameras. Instead, he was escorted in silence to a detention chamber deep beneath the palace, a place meant for rare internal threats that needed reflection, not exposure. No cameras, no shackles, no interrogations. Just a solitary room of concrete and echo, a flickering bulb overhead, and guards outside the reinforced steel door who avoided eye contact. Even they didn't know what to believe. And Traoré. He didn't return to his quarters. He sat alone in his office long after the advisors had gone, watching the looping video on the monitor again and again. The same motion, Musa stepping from behind the tree, the glint of the shotgun, the recoil, the window cracking, the look in his eyes after the shot. Not rage, not guilt, grief. He paused the video, stared at the frozen image, then slowly reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. Two young men in military fatigues, their arms around each other, faces dusty and bright. One was Ibrahim Traoré, the other Musa Kabore, smiling alive before politics and scars. He remembered that day, the place, Kobari 2003, the border raid, the bullets. The moment Musa threw his body across Ibrahim to shield him. The debt owed, the bond made, the secret kept. Traoré closed his eyes. How did it come to this? And in the quiet of that question, the past began to speak. 6 months earlier, the scent of engine oil and sun-baked metal filled the barracks courtyard as Musa knelt, field stripping a rifle with practiced hands. Around him, other guards were laughing loud, reckless laughter, the kind that only came from men pretending not to notice they were at war with something much larger than guns. Poverty, silence, and ghosts that never died. But Musa wasn't laughing. His fingers paused over the trigger assembly, his brow furrowed. Across the yard, a letter poked from the chest pocket of his uniform, a foreign seal stamped across the back. He hadn't told anyone he received it, not even Traoré, especially not Traoré, and if anyone had looked close enough, they might have noticed. His hands were shaking. The sky hung low, bruised and bleeding ash as the village of Gando burned. It wasn't even noon, but the sun had vanished behind a curtain of smoke rising from the thatched rooftops. Flames dancing like cruel laughter across homes that had stood for generations. Gunfire cracked in the distance, sharp and rhythmic, like the final coughs of a dying animal. President Traoré, then still Captain Ibrahim, arrived late. His boots touched down in hot sand from the side of a rattling military truck, and the stench of scorched maize blood and diesel hit him like a wave. Behind him, 6 soldiers fanned out weapons, drawn, nerves high. They expected ambush as survivors, maybe even insurgents still prowling the edges of the fields. What they didn't expect was the figure standing tall in the center of the chaos, shielding 3 children with his bare body. The man was caked in soot and blood. Not all of it was his. His shirt was torn, his back lined with fresh cuts. One hand clutched a dented cooking pot like a shield, the other raised in defiance toward an incoming militia jeep, roaring down the far path. Before Traoré could even speak, he watched the man step in front of the children as the gun mounted on the jeep began to swivel toward them. A moment, a choice. Traoré shouted an order. His men opened fire. The militia jeep exploded into flames before it could fire a single shot. A scream tore through the air, then silence. Smoke curled between the broken huts. The children clung to the man's legs, sobbing. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just breathed, in and out, as if he'd made peace with death long ago and now found himself surprised it hadn't come. Captain Traoré approached slowly, rifle still in hand. "Name?" he asked, voice low. The man turned. Brown eyes, steady, tired, defiant. "Musa," he said. "Kabore." There was no salute, no fear, just an edge of exhaustion sharpened by something deeper principle. Traoré noticed the insignia on Musa's chest. "None. You're not military." "No," Musa said. "Then why stay?" The man looked down at the children. One was barefoot. Another had a burn across his cheek. "Because they couldn't run," Musa said softly. "Someone had to be the wall." Traoré felt something shift in his chest. In a war full of cowards with stripes and men who hid behind uniforms, here stood a civilian who had stood between bullets and orphans with nothing but kitchenware and a stare that didn't blink. He gave the man a long look, the kind of look that weighed a soul without speaking. Then he nodded. "We leave in 10. You ride with us." "I have no orders," Musa replied. "You do now." That was the beginning. No ceremony, no handshake, just a man who chose not to run and another who recognized something in him the world had missed. In the weeks that followed, Musa never asked for a title. He slept on barrack floors, ate with the recruits trained alone after dark. He never boasted, but word spread he shot straighter, ran faster, fought harder. Not for glory, but out of quiet duty, the kind only war can measure. And Traoré. He watched. He saw in Musa the thing every leader dreams of, but rarely earns loyalty without incentive. But he also saw something else in Edge, shaped by years of poverty, betrayal, and silence. A silent rage always simmering beneath the stillness. One night as they sat beneath the stars on the outskirts of a liberated town, Traoré handed Musa a worn patch with the national crest. "You'll wear this from now on." Musa looked at it, then at Traoré. "I didn't ask for rank." "I'm not offering rank," Traoré replied. "I'm offering purpose." Musa didn't smile, but he took the patch. And when he stitched it to his sleeve that night with slow, careful fingers, it was not just cloth, it was a promise. One that years later, he would be forced to choose between. At first he trained alone. While others rested or laughed after drills, Musa stayed behind. His body moved through the sand like clockwork rifle disassembly and reassembly, then again blindfolded. Push-ups until his arms trembled. Sprints in full gear beneath the afternoon sun. Not for praise, not for rank, but as if punishment was prayer and mastery, the only forgiveness he needed. The soldiers watched at first with curiosity, then quiet respect. Some whispered that he moved like a man who feared sleep. Others said it was guilt. But Traoré knew better. It was focus, absolute, dangerous, beautiful. In the span of weeks, Musa became the silent core of the unit, the ghost who always covered your flank. The man who didn't shout, didn't break formation, didn't miss. During one exercise, a fake grenade rolled too close to a medic who tripped in the mud. While others ducked, Musa charged forward, yanked the soldier up by the vest, and dragged him out seconds before the ground burst. Later, Traoré pulled him aside. "You weren't even on that side of the field." Musa shrugged, wiping dirt from his arms. "Doesn't matter. It does. You could have been hit." So could he. Traoré stared at him, half frustrated, half impressed. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The moment passed, but it was one of many, and each built the bridge of trust not from orders, but instinct. Over time, the formality between them cracked. They shared late-night meals, dry rice and fish stew scooped with fingers, the smell of firewood soaking their uniforms. They sparred in the moonlight, bare-knuckled bruising, but never cruel. One night, Musa bloodied Traoré's lip. The captain only laughed, then hit back harder. "You fight like you never learned fear," Traoré said, spitting into the dirt. Musa replied, calm as ever. "I learned it too early. Now I've used it up." At night, beneath the whining hum of mosquito nets, they spoke in half-whispers about home regrets and things soldiers rarely said out loud. Traoré spoke of his father, a preacher turned dissident, imprisoned for preaching peace. Musa spoke of the time his village lost water for weeks, and the government sent bullets instead of aid. They never pitied each other. They just understood. One night during a lull in operations as gunfire echoed miles away, they sat in silence watching smoke curl in the distance. Then Traoré said something Musa would never forget. "One day we'll fight for a country that doesn't fear its own people." Musa turned to him, eyes tired, voice even. "Do you think that place exists?" "No," Traoré said, "but we can build it." It wasn't a command. It wasn't propaganda. It was hope. From that night on, Musa followed no one else. Not out of obligation, not even friendship, but out of something rarer, conviction. He wasn't just Traoré's shield. He became his shadow, the quiet voice before speeches, the second pair of eyes in every crowd, the body that always stood between the president and a bullet even when no threat loomed. And Traoré. He never questioned Musa's presence, never ordered him to stay. He simply moved forward, knowing if anything fell, Musa would be the first to catch it. Together they walked through ambushes, diplomatic traps, and villages filled with both cheers and suspicion. One led the other protected, and somewhere along that path, they stopped being soldier and officer. They became brothers, until the day Musa raised a gun. The convoy rolled into Koro Pass just before twilight, the sun dipping low and angry behind jagged ridgelines. The road ahead wound like a scar through the gorge, too narrow, too quiet, too perfect for an ambush. Musa sat in the rear vehicle, scanning ridgelines through half-lowered windows. His fingers tapped the stock of his rifle rhythm, steady, unreadable. Up ahead, Traoré rode in the lead helmet, off eyes on the map spread across his knees. They were en route to negotiate a ceasefire with a rebel splinter group, young fighters, badly trained, high on righteousness and Kalashnikov bravado. Halfway into the pass, the earth erupted. A mine detonated under the third vehicle, a flash of fire and metal that sent the armored truck airborne, crashing down on its side with a guttural shriek. Sand and stone exploded from the hills. Shadows moved like ghosts on the cliffs. Gunfire opened up in a devastating crossfire. Chaos. Musa was out of the vehicle before the smoke cleared, barking orders, pulling two soldiers from the wreckage with inhuman speed. Bullets screamed past him, carving hot lines through the air. He dropped to a crouch, returning fire with surgical precision. 2 shots, 2 downed rebels. Then he saw it. Traoré, pushed out of his truck by the blast, coughing, bleeding from the scalp, dazed in the open, trying to crawl behind a slab of broken asphalt. A rebel sniper raised his rifle from the ridge. Musa didn't hesitate. He ran, not around the fire, not ducking, but straight through it, body low, steps sure. As the sniper fired, Musa threw himself in front of Traoré, arms out like wings. The bullet struck him beneath the ribs. He grunted, fell forward, but kept moving, grabbing Traoré by the collar and dragging him behind the shattered vehicle, leaving a dark red smear across the pavement. Traoré struggled to sit up, gasping. "Musa, what? Shut up! You're alive!" Another volley of gunfire tore through the steel beside them. Musa winced. His hand pressed hard against the wound, trying to hold himself in. Medic Traoré roared into his radio, eyes wild. Now he's hit, but Musa gripped his wrist. "No, you move first. Don't be stupid. You die, this country dies." Their eyes met, dirt and smoke between them, and something passed silently. Not duty, but something older. Something primal. Earned. In that moment, Traoré didn't see a bodyguard. He saw a brother. Ignoring protocol, ignoring everything but instinct, Traoré shouldered Musa's weight and lifted him off the ground. The man was heavier than he looked, muscle, blood, and pain, but Traoré didn't care. Bullets rained. Traoré ran. Through fire and screams, he carried Musa towards safety, shouting cover orders, dodging debris. The world narrowing to one mission: don't let him die. They made it to the evac ridge, just as reinforcements arrived. Musa was laid on the stretcher, pale but conscious. Medics swarmed him. Before the doors of the emergency vehicle shut, Traoré leaned in close. "You said you'd be the wall," I was, Musa whispered. "But sometimes walls crack. Then I'll be yours." The doors slammed shut. That night, as the stars returned to a smoke-filled sky, soldiers whispered a new truth. Musa Kabor had taken a bullet for the captain, and the captain had carried him through hell. They were no longer just comrades. They were bound by the one thing war never lies about: sacrifice. The room was cold, not from the air conditioning, though, that hummed faintly behind the wall panel, but from the men inside. The only light came from the wide wall screen playing looped surveillance footage in grayscale. No sound, just images: President Ibrahim Traoré waving to children beside a school ribbon, then shaking hands with Chinese delegates, then standing beside oil engineers at a rig recently seized from a French multinational. Each clip more dangerous than the last. Hugo Sinclair leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Mid-50s, well-cut gray suit hair, combed with surgical precision, the faintest smirk beneath eyes trained to calculate risk faster than missiles traveled. He watched as Traoré's smile played on screen. Then, to no one in particular, he said, "He's consolidating, faster than projected." The man beside him, a regional CIA attaché with sweat pooling behind his collar, swallowed hard. "We thought he'd stay in our lane, posturing for votes, but now he's nationalizing foreign oil." Sinclair interrupted. Another clip played. Traoré at a military base, pinning medals on local commanders once aligned with Western intelligence programs, rewriting the command structure, removing all French-aligned leadership, the attaché muttered. Sinclair nodded once. "And worse, he's stabilizing." He stood and walked slowly toward the screen. A new clip rolled, grainy body cam footage from a soldier's vest during the Coro Pass ambush. It froze mid-motion. Musa Kabore, diving in front of Traoré, the bullet passing just inches from the president's head. Sinclair tapped the screen. This one, the shield. What do we know about him? A woman in the corner, a quiet analyst with thick glasses and an English accent sharp enough to draw blood, answered. Corporal Musa Kabor, former civilian, recruited by Traoré during internal campaigns. No known affiliations, no bribes accepted. Loyal, quiet, lethal. Sinclair smiled faintly. Perfect. The attaché blinked. Sorry, Sinclair turned. We don't need to fight Traoré. The people still adore him. The region's too volatile for a full coup. Markets would scream. He stepped closer, voice calm as falling ash. But loyalty, real loyalty, it doesn't crack. It fractures. Quietly, slowly. You just need the right pressure. A pause. He trusts this Kabor. Too much. That's the angle. The analyst looked skeptical. He took a bullet for him. Nearly died. Sinclair's eyes glinted. Which means he'll feel it more when the trust breaks. He walked to a silver briefcase and snapped it open with theatrical precision. Inside a leather folder, a data chip, and a small photograph of Musa, unsmiling, seated beside Traoré at an outdoor lunch table. Sinclair plucked the photo and held it to the light. We don't need a traitor. We just need a man with a reason. He closed the case with a click. Send the feeler. Carefully. Offer help. A favor. Debt forgiveness for a cousin. Medicine for his mother. Doesn't matter. Just enough to let the crack begin. The CIA man raised an eyebrow. And if he refuses, Sinclair's smile vanished. Everyone has a cost. If Musa can't be bought, then we'll make him believe he already sold something without knowing. A heavy silence followed. Finally, the analyst spoke again. Is this sanctioned? Sinclair looked amused. Everything is sanctioned eventually. He turned off the screen. Outside, the city of Abidjan buzzed with heat and commerce. Inside, a new kind of war had just begun. Not with bombs, not with votes, but with a whisper sent to the right man at the right moment. And far across the border in Ouagadougou, Musa Kabor was still reporting for duty, rifle-polished eyes, sharp heart loyal. Unaware that soon, he would be asked to choose between the brother he swore to protect and the truth he had buried. The bar was empty except for flies and lies. A ceiling fan creaked above, spinning slow circles in the thick heat. The only other sound was the slow melting of ice in a glass untouched. Musa Kabor stepped inside still in partial uniform collar, unbuttoned sweat darkening his back. He scanned the room, tension buried beneath a soldier's stillness. In the corner beneath shadow and slatted light, Hugo Sinclair sat waiting, tie loosened, a half-smile on his lips like a man meeting an old friend. Corporal Kabore Sinclair said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Thank you for coming. Musa didn't sit. You said it was about medicine for my mother. That's the only reason I'm here. Sinclair chuckled softly, eyes narrowing like a snake preparing to uncoil. Of course, but we both know nothing in this world is ever just about one thing. He reached under the table, pulled out a small black duffel bag, and unzipped it slowly, like a magician revealing his final act. Stacks of bills. Crisp, neatly wrapped. $1 million, real, untraceable, raw. The air shifted. Musa didn't flinch, but his breathing slowed. You think I'm for sale? No, Sinclair said, voice smooth. I think you're a man trapped between two fires. A man who has already given everything to a country that gives nothing back. He leaned forward, fingers tapping the bag. What has loyalty bought you, Musa? Look at your boots. Look at your hands. Look at your mother. The silence sharpened. She's dying, isn't she? Sinclair continued. The hospital wants cash. You can't afford the treatment. And your sister. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. Musa's jaw twitched. You've been watching my family. We've been paying attention. Something your government no longer bothers to do. He pushed the bag forward. You don't need to pull a trigger. You don't need to betray anyone. Just hesitate. Just turn your back once. That's all. After that, you disappear. We'll get your mother the medicine. We'll relocate your sister to Dakar. You get a new name. A clean life. Musa stared at the money like it might burn through the table. And the president, he'll live or die by his own choices. Just like you. Musa didn't respond. He turned and walked out. Sinclair didn't stop him. He knew he didn't need to. Ouagadougou's outskirts were quieter than its palaces, but somehow heavier. Musa walked the narrow dirt path to his childhood home, past crumbling walls painted with old slogans, past barefoot children too tired to wave. The house looked smaller than he remembered, and thinner. His sister Aissata met him at the door. Her eyes were sunken but warm. Inside, his mother lay on a reed mat, coughing blood into a cloth she thought no one saw. The medicine was gone. The doctors had stopped coming. The roof leaked. They had no running water, no generator, no future. At dinner, they split a single yam between the three of them. Aissata laughed too loudly at nothing. His mother asked how the president was. Musa smiled and lied. Later that night, as crickets screamed outside and thunder cracked low in the east, Musa sat alone by the door, staring into the dark. He thought of Traoré's words. "We fight for a country that doesn't fear its own people. But what if the country feared truth? What if loyalty cost the ones you loved more than it protected them?" His hands were steady. His stomach was empty. And his soul was beginning to crack. The suitcase sat silently in the corner of the room, unopened, untouched, but louder than any explosion Musa had ever heard. The walls around him were bare cracked cement and peeling posters of a faded revolution. A ceiling fan clicked without rhythm, pushing warm air that smelled of old sweat and older doubt. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. The money was still there, still real, still waiting. A quiet beast wrapped in leather. He sat on the floor back against the wall knees, bent fingers twitching against his thigh, like they had before every firefight. And the memories came uninvited, vivid, vicious. First the village of Gondo flames, painting the night, the screams of children echoing between huts, and a younger Traoré reaching out to him, face streaked with soot, saying, "You come with us now. You don't run anymore." Then the training field's fists colliding in the moonlight, laughter sharp and raw, the bond forged over bruises and bruised ideals. Then the sniper's scope at Koro Pass. The flash, the pain, the blur of blood and shouts as Traoré dragged him from death's jaws like a man possessed. These weren't politics. These were memories, and they bled more than any bullet ever could. His eyes drifted to the suitcase again. $1 million. Enough to buy silence, escape forgiveness. Enough to save his mother. Enough to buy time. But at what cost? He stood, slowly, carefully, like every step cracked something deeper inside him. He approached the suitcase. He didn't open it, not yet. He just stood there staring. And then from somewhere inside him, quiet, almost inaudible, came the voice. Just one shot. The words weren't Sinclair's. Not anymore. They belonged to the air now, to the room, to the weight pressing on his chest. No questions asked. His breath caught. He'd told himself he was just listening, just buying time. But now, the voice had slipped beneath the armor. Just one shot, not a betrayal, not a murder, just a release. His hand hovered above the case, and the flashbacks twisted. Traoré laughing barefoot in the rain after a diplomatic win. Traoré arguing with generals refusing to send poor conscripts into a rich man's war. Traoré saying, "If they kill me, let it be with my head high, not bowed to their money." Musa closed his eyes. If he pulled the trigger, he'd silence a man who still believed, who still fought for a country that didn't deserve him, who bled for unity, while the world picked his nation apart like vultures on bone. But if he didn't, his mother would die. His sister would fade. His past would swallow them whole, even as his honor tried to hold the line. His hand touched the handle. Just one shot, no questions asked. He dropped to his knees, fists clenched, chest shaking. No tears, just breath raw and scraped. In the hallway, a neighbor's baby cried. In the distance, a generator coughed into life. And inside his head, 2 truths collided. He owed the man his life. He owed his family their survival. Musa whispered into the silence, "Tell me what I'm supposed to do." But no voice answered. Only the suitcase. Only the promise. Only the silence that comes before everything breaks. The shotgun lay silent beneath the floorboards wrapped in oilcloth. Barrels, freshly cleaned grip, worn smooth like a prayer stone. Musa had memorized every inch of it. Not as a killer, as a soldier. as a man clinging to duty twisted beyond recognition. He checked the screws on the wall panel once more, careful not to scratch the finish. Then he replaced the rug, straightened the old stool beside it, and stepped back into the dim glow of his single overhead bulb. On the small wooden table sat a folded piece of paper scribbled times and notes in precise block handwriting. Convoy departs 12:05 from Palace Gate. Takes Avenue Charles de Gaulle, slows at Monument Roundabout. Third SUV is unarmored. Traoré prefers the front right seat. Each line carved another mark on his conscience. Outside, the city was already murmuring with tension. Posters hung from every crumbling wall. Traoré's face beneath slogans of unity and reform. Children rehearsed songs for the Independence Parade. Streets were swept twice in one day. Flags stitched overnight. And Musa counted down seconds. He sat cross-legged on the mat and reached beneath his cot. From beneath a stack of folded fatigues, he pulled out an old photograph, creased but not torn. In it, two men grinned under a makeshift shade, tarp faces smeared with field dust, bowls of rice in their laps. Musa and Traoré. No uniforms, no titles. Just men laughing like they'd earned joy in a world that rarely allowed it. Musa stared at it for a long time, then turned it over. On the back scrawled in Traoré's looping script, "If I fall, pick up the flag, not the gun." Musa clenched it in his palm until the corners bit into his skin. What was loyalty, he wondered, not the word but the act? Was it protection or honesty? Was it taking the shot or refusing to? And if your choice condemned the people you loved, did that make it wrong or necessary? He rose and moved to the sink, washed his hands in silence. The water ran red, not with blood, but rust. The pipes were old, like everything else. At 11:00 sharp, he pulled out a nondescript courier bag, inside a disassembled shotgun broken into halves. Light, untraceable, meant for one task? He placed the stock beside the bag, then the barrel. Then a final item, a small velvet pouch holding a single gold pendant from his mother. He hesitated, then dropped it in. His hands trembled. He reached for the light switch, stopped, turned instead to the corner of the room where the mat still lay, knelt, bowed his head. And for the first time in months he prayed, not to be forgiven, not to be strong, but simply to survive whatever came after. His lips moved soundlessly. If I fall, let it be for something, not for fear. At 11:47 he stepped into the street. The bag swung light against his side, his uniform crisp, boots polished, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. The crowd around the presidential boulevard was already swelling. Kids climbed lampposts. Women handed out flags. Security officers murmured into radios, too distracted to glance twice at a decorated corporal. Musa moved past them like shadow. He reached the abandoned apartment with the shattered balcony at precisely 11:55, climbed the 3 stories, set the bag down, unzipped it with fingers he could no longer feel. He worked like muscle memory. Click, snap, twist, lock. He laid the shotgun across his knees and sat back, watching the empty road below. From here he could see the roundabout, the flags fluttering, the camera crews setting up, and down the road he heard sirens. The convoy was coming. He whispered the final instruction, barely audible like a curse. Wait for the third SUV. Aim for the driver's door. He swallowed dry and waited. The third SUV turned the corner, exactly on time, exactly as planned. Its black chassis gleamed beneath the high sun, bulletproof windows rolled down just enough to let the crowd catch a glimpse of the man inside. President Ibrahim Traoré leaned out slightly, waving at the children lining the barricades, his expression calm and open, as if he could not feel the storm curling invisibly around him. High above, behind the cracked balcony rail, Musa held the shotgun steady. His breathing slowed, his finger curled over the trigger. The voices below blurred chants, songs, horns, and all he could hear was the drumbeat in his ears, each pulse loud as a gunshot. He whispered to himself not to steady his hand, but to keep it from shaking apart. Just one shot. No questions asked. He focused on the car door, the driver's seat. But then Traoré turned, not toward the cheering crowd, upwards, toward him. Their eyes met. It wasn't surprise on the president's face. It wasn't fear. It was something far more dangerous. Recognition. Musa hesitated, one heartbeat too long. Then he squeezed. The shot roared. Chaos exploded. Screams tore through the boulevard as the shotgun blast echoed off stone and metal. Birds scattered from rooftops. The SUV slammed to a stop. Agents leapt into motion, drawing weapons, throwing open doors, tackling civilians out of the line of fire. Musa's shot had grazed a bodyguard's helmet, knocking him down but sparing his life. Blood splattered, but no one had died. Not yet. In the moment of panic, Musa stood frozen. He hadn't missed by accident. He'd missed because he couldn't see Traoré as a target. He could still see the man who once handed him a canteen in the desert, the man who carried him on his back, the man who said, "You are not a weapon. You are a choice." The rooftop door burst open behind him. Musa spun, expecting a gun. But it wasn't an agent. It was Traoré himself, breathless from the stairs, shirt torn from diving through the SUV door, eyes blazing with something deeper than fury. Betrayal. He didn't shout. He didn't order. He lunged. Musa dropped the gun without thinking. They collided, bodies crashing into broken tiles, dust flying as they rolled across the balcony. For a moment it was fists, knees, weight. Then it stopped Traoré, pinning him down, elbow at Musa's throat, their faces inches apart. Silence returned like a slap. Crowds screamed below. Sirens wailed. But up here only two men remained, one holding, one breaking. Traoré looked into his eyes and whispered. Why brother Musa couldn't speak. His lips trembled. His chest heaved. But no words came. Only shame. Only the sound of his heart caving in. I gave you everything, Traoré said quietly. I trusted you when no one else would. I know, Musa croaked. Then why Musa swallowed hard. The words finally rose broken and hoarse. Because they said, if I didn't, my mother would die. My sister, she's starving. He blinked hard. And I believed them. Just for a second, I believed they cared. Traoré's expression didn't change. He slowly pulled his weight back, let Musa breathe. Then he sat beside him, eyes still locked. The shotgun lay between them, harmless now. The president stared at it like it was a mirror. They always find the best of us, he said. Not to kill, but to break. Musa nodded. I didn't want to, I swear. But you raised the gun, Traoré said, voice low. I missed, Musa replied, barely audible. On purpose, Musa didn't answer. He didn't have to, because both men already knew the truth. The agents stormed the stairs seconds later, rifles raised, eyes scanning. But when they reached the balcony, they found Musa kneeling, head bowed, hands behind his back. The president raised a hand. Don't shoot. And for a moment, just a moment, the storm paused, because the shot had been fired. The betrayal had been made. But the war in Musa's heart was still unfolding. The nation held its breath. The bullet had missed, the traitor had been unmasked, and the world expected swift justice, blood for betrayal. But President Ibrahim Traoré did not follow the script. In a press conference held just hours after the attempt, he stood before a wall of flickering microphones, dark circles beneath his eyes, one sleeve torn, his voice hoarse but steady. Corporal Musa Kabor will not be executed. Gasps rippled through the crowd like aftershocks. He was my brother in arms. He fell not for greed, but for desperation. That does not erase the crime, but it demands we examine the crime's roots. Journalists shouted. Flashbulbs erupted. Foreign envoys whispered behind closed doors. The opposition froze, unsure how to spin mercy. Outside, some wept. Others burned Musa's photo in protest. A few knelt in silence, not in worship, but in mourning for a country sick enough to make good men break. Meanwhile, in a sealed chamber beneath the palace, Musa sat, handcuffed wrists, raw eyes hollow, with what he had become. When Traoré entered the room, he didn't bring guards. Just a folder and a long silence. He placed the folder on the table. Inside, a document marked with presidential seal. Exile. You won't see prison, Traoré said, and you won't see the capital again. Musa raised his eyes slowly. You're letting me go. No, Traoré replied. I'm sending you to the north, the border villages, the ones no one wants to touch. Musa frowned. To fight, to build, to teach, to protect. A bitter chuckle escaped Musa's throat. "And if I say no, then stay here, in this cell. But I think you want to earn back your name, even if no one ever says it again without shame." He stood, walked to the door, then paused. "You aimed at the driver's door, not at me." Musa said nothing. Traoré didn't press. 2 weeks later, a rusted military truck rumbled out of the capital, its lone passenger staring out at parched land and dry sky. Musa Kabor was no longer a soldier, no longer a traitor, not quite a ghost. He carried no weapon, just a duffel bag, a torn photograph, and the weight of a decision that nearly shattered a nation. Villagers watched him warily as he arrived. Whispers followed him like a shadow. The man who tried to kill the president. The man the president forgave. He didn't explain himself. He helped rebuild a school roof. He cleared a minefield by hand. He fetched water from a well 2 miles away without complaint. Some cursed his name. Some gave him bread. But none knew what to make of him, a broken man trying to rebuild something even more broken than himself. The road into Benora was barely more than a scar across the land, a single lane of packed red clay, winding through thorn trees and heat-shimmering emptiness. The truck left Musa with a jolt of dust and silence. No farewell, no escort. Just a glance from the driver that said everything you don't deserve more. Musa stood alone, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, boots crunching in the dry soil. The sun overhead burned with unflinching judgment, bleaching the horizon to a white haze. Benora lay ahead, a village built from fragments, corrugated metal walls, leaning shacks, goats, chewing plastic bags, and children with eyes too old for their faces. No one greeted him. No signs, no questions, only suspicion in the stares that followed him as he walked. He passed a well with a broken pulley. An old woman sat beside it, fanning herself with a scrap of cardboard. A boy stood barefoot in the shade of a single tree, holding a rusted pot like it might birth a miracle. Musa approached the local outpost, a structure barely standing walls held up by rusted rebar and fading UN graffiti. Inside, a man behind a desk glanced up, chewed his pen, then nodded as if to say, "So you're the ghost they sent." No words were exchanged, just a gesture toward a cot, a note on a clipboard, a signed labor manual. Report to foreman, no security clearance, no uniform. The next day, Musa began work. He drew water, or tried to. The well had to be primed each morning, its crank groaning like a wounded animal. He reinforced the pulley with a strip of bike chain. He carried jugs on his back to homes where widows no longer had sons to fetch it. He dug soil hard-packed, unyielding. He coaxed shallow roots to grow in cracked furrows, sweating under the glare, as if trying to plant something in himself. And most of all, he taught. In a crumbling schoolhouse made of tin and stubbornness, he sat cross-legged with a dozen children whose fathers had disappeared in wars they were too young to name. He showed them letters: A for air, B for bread, C for chance, and how to write their names with fingers still trembling from hunger. At night, he washed his hands in a basin outside his hut. The water turned the color of dried blood. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He answered questions with nods. His only possessions were the clothes he arrived in, a dented tin plate, and the photo of him and Traoré folded in his shirt pocket, soft at the corners from too much remembering. There were no uniforms in Benora. No orders to follow, no enemies to kill, only work. The villagers kept their distance at first. They watched, waited. Some still spat when they passed him. Others muttered prayers under their breath, warding off his shadow like it might carry disease. But when the pump broke, it was Musa who crawled into the shaft. When a snake bit the miller's daughter, it was Musa who tied the tourniquet. And when the food stores ran low, it was Musa who rode 3 hours on a borrowed bicycle to negotiate with grain traders returning with a sack on each shoulder. He never asked for thanks. He never gave speeches. But the silence around him shifted from contempt to curiosity, then cautiously to something else. Respect, perhaps. Not forgiveness, but a start. And in the solitude between chores, in the ache of his spine, and the dirt beneath his nails, Musa began to feel something unfamiliar. Not peace, but purpose. The day had been long, the sun heavy on Musa's shoulders as he repaired a collapsed section of irrigation trench. His hands were blistered, the soles of his boots worn thin. By dusk, the dirt clung to him like second skin. his breath shallow with fatigue. He sat beside the school wall, wiping his brow with a frayed rag, when he heard footsteps, small ones, approaching with hesitant rhythm. He turned and saw her, a little girl no older than 7, the one who always lingered after lessons, who drew pictures of mango trees and asked if clouds ever visited other villages. Today she held something in her outstretched hands. "A man with a hat gave this to me," she said softly. "Said it was for you." Musa took the envelope. It was thick parchment sealed with red wax, the edges creased by heat and time. The seal, the presidential insignia of Ouagadougou, made his pulse skip. He stared at it for several long moments. "Do you know what it says?" the girl asked, tilting her head. He shook his head. "Not yet. Is it good news?" He managed a tired smile. "Maybe." She beamed at that, then skipped off, humming something off-key but beautiful. Musa remained seated alone beneath the wide western sky, the envelope heavy in his hand. He broke the seal slowly, unfolded the thick paper, and read, "To the man who once stood beside me, not behind me. If you still carry a heart for this country, for its people, I ask you to return. Not to fight, but to serve in a way only you can. Dark winds are rising again. I feel them, even here behind my walls. But I remember the day you dove into fire to pull a stranger out. That is the Musa I write to now. If you still believe in something bigger, then guilt come home. It. Musa blinked, his eyes suddenly burning. He hadn't cried since the trial. Not when they sentenced him. Not even when the children first recoiled from his shadow. But now, he swallowed hard, folded the letter, held it against his chest as if trying to keep it from blowing away with the dust. What was this redemption, a test, a trap? It was a chance, a fragile, trembling chance. Fragile, not to erase what had happened, but to become more than it. He looked out at the horizon. The sky had turned lavender, streaked with ash and rose. The children were calling each other in for dinner. The fields waited for tomorrow's tending. He didn't know what he would say, or if he even could, but he knew one thing for certain: he would answer. Not for forgiveness, but because someone still believed he could be more than the worst thing he'd ever done. 3 days after the letter arrived, a government jeep pulled into Benora at sunrise. The same villagers who once spat at Musa now watched in silence as he climbed into the back duffel bag in hand, eyes forward, heart pounding. No words were exchanged, no ceremony. Just the soft hum of tires against red dust and the dry wind carrying a faint promise. This time the mission is different. When Musa arrived in the capital, it was through the service tunnels, not the palace gates. He was taken to a discreet safe house on the edge of the city, where 3 familiar faces greeted him, 2 former agents he once trained with, and 1 civilian intelligence officer whose name was never spoken aloud. The room was dimly lit, bare, except for a map spread across a scarred wooden table. Pin strings and satellite images formed a chaotic web. "There's chatter," the officer said flatly. "Not rumor." "Confirmed plans?" Rebels, Musa asked. "Worse. Mercenary trained splinter group, operating out of Kola Basin. They're planning something big, coordinated. We think it's a hit on the Unity Summit next week. High-value targets. President Traoré will be there." Musa's throat tightened. "Why me? Because no one expects you anymore," the officer said. "You're a ghost, invisible. That makes you valuable. And because the president asked for you." Personally, Musa stood in silence. He was no longer the soldier he had once been. No badge, no clearance, no rank. Just the mark of betrayal stamped across his back in silence. And yet, they were offering him a role again, not of power, but of trust. "You're not being reinstated as a soldier," the officer continued. "You'll operate off-grid, quiet, no weapons unless necessary, observation, infiltration, disruption. And if I fail," Musa asked. The room was quiet. "You won't." That night, Musa sat alone in the safe house, watching the city lights blink beyond the window bars. Ouagadougou hadn't changed much. Neither had he. But something inside him had shifted, not healed, not forgotten, but repurposed. He opened his duffel, took out only 2 things: a clean shirt and the folded letter from Benora's school children, signed in shaky handwriting. "Thank you, Mr. Musa. Come back when you're done saving people." He smiled faintly. This time there was no mission briefing filled with kill orders. No plan ending with bodies. His mission wasn't to eliminate but to prevent, to shield, not strike. He was going back into the fire, but not as a weapon, as a wall. For the first time in years, he felt steady, not whole, but pointed in the right direction. He rolled the map back open, studied the patterns again. Roots, blind spots, names, the details that others might overlook, but not him. Not someone who had once stood on both sides of a scope. Redemption wasn't loud. It didn't wear medals. It moved in silence and left behind peace where others would leave chaos. And Musa Kabore, once a traitor, was ready to protect the man he once nearly destroyed. Because sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who already lost everything and chose to come back anyway. Rain fell in slow, steady sheets, turning the forest clearing into a basin of glistening mud and soaked foliage. Thick drops drummed against the wide banana leaves, bounced off the rusted barrels of camouflage rifles, and sank into the brown uniforms of the men crouched in silence. They were 15 in total. Rebels, hard and hungry, faceless, under wet scarves. Eyes sharp, hands steady, triggers half-pressed in anticipation. They waited near a collapsed concrete bridge, a decades-old relic cracked open by monsoons and forgotten by infrastructure. On the surface, it looked like a route long abandoned. But beneath the crumbled structure and creeping vines, a tactical vantage had been set. The men had been briefed well. They knew the pattern. Third SUV, back right seat. That's where President Ibrahim Traoré would be. From within a makeshift comm tent, hidden beneath tarpaulin and branches, the rebel commander monitored a tablet glowing dim in the rain-soaked dark. Drones had confirmed it, convoy approaching 12 minutes out. He radioed to the flank teams in low-clip tones. Positions locked. Visual markers, fog flare east of the clearing. Do not fire until signal. No room for improvisation. They weren't a ragtag militia this time. They were trained, supplied, paid, and waiting. Further down the winding road, the black convoy sliced through the mist, 3 armored SUVs and 2 unmarked decoys flanking front and rear. Wipers thumped rhythmically against the downpour. Inside the second vehicle, President Traoré reviewed briefing notes on a small screen, fingers tapping unconsciously. The aide beside him glanced up. "Visibility's poor, sir. Might want to delay by half an hour." Traoré shook his head. "If we delay, we show fear. And if we show fear, they win. Security is scanning. No pings yet. No pings doesn't mean no threat." His tone wasn't sharp, just weary. The kind of weary that comes not from a day's work, but from a lifetime of navigating shadows while trying to shine light. He leaned back, eyes drifting toward the fog-covered treetops. Somewhere he could feel it. Something waited. In a shallow ridge just ahead, Musa Kabore lay prone beneath a veil of rain-drenched vines, binoculars pressed to his eyes. His breath was calm, steady. The mud soaked through his jacket and shirt, but he didn't flinch. He'd followed the trail, read the boot prints, spotted the cut in the grass where the rebels had dragged crates of ammunition. This was it. He could see them now, 3 rebels on the left embankment crouched low scope scanning. A 4th adjusted what looked like a shoulder-mounted RPG. Musa whispered into the mic strapped beneath his collarbone. Eyes confirmed. 12 combatants. Bridge perimeter. Possible RPG at ridge northeast. Copy that, a voice crackled back. Reinforcements. Negative. No time. I'm going in. Musa waited, but he was already moving. He slid downslope low and fast, weaving through soaked brush and exposed roots. His weapon, a compact tranquilizer pistol, bounced at his side. Not lethal. Not this time. Back at the clearing, the rebels tensed. The lead SUV was in sight. The commander whispered, "On my mark." He raised the flare, flicked the striker, a spark, then a hiss. The forest lit up in a sulfurous green glow. Now click. But before the RPG could fire, a body slammed into the shooter from the ridge, Musa tackling hard, sending both tumbling down in a splash of mud and curses. The ambush began, but not as planned. Shouts erupted, gunfire tore through leaves, and in the chaos, Musa crawled forward through the storm toward a detonator box wired beneath the bridge. He had 30 seconds to stop it, or it wouldn't be just betrayal this time, it would be war. The storm had become a sheet of noise rain, hammering leaves, gunfire, crackling, sporadically panicked shouts slicing through the clearing. But within the chaos, Musa moved like water through reeds, invisible, intentional, unrelenting. After disabling the detonator, he slipped behind a tangle of vines and circled the clearing's outer ridge. He spotted the first guard beside a camouflaged ammunition crate, fumbling to reload. In one swift motion, Musa struck from behind, arm wrapped around the man's throat, the tranquilizer needle piercing clean into his neck. The rebel thrashed once, then went limp. No gunshots, no sound. One down. Ahead, two rebels crouched back to back near a comms crate. Musa scooped up a jagged rock, tossed it across the clearing, and ducked behind a rotted stump. The noise drew one of them out, rifle raised. Bad mistake. Musa pounced. The man spun too late. A flash of fists, a twist of the wrist, and the rifle was out of his hands. Musa dropped him with a crushing elbow to the sternum, then swept the legs of the second rebel before he could react. The impact knocked him cold. 3. Silent. Precise. Musa didn't breathe for long. Every second counted. The SUV convoy was slowing. Inside the third vehicle, President Traoré instinctively scanned the tree line. His security detail shouted, "We've lost drone eyes, possible jamming." Another leaned toward him, hand hovering near a panic button. "Mr. President, we have to abort." But Traoré didn't move. His eyes narrowed. "No, someone's out there." And he was right. At the bridge's center, the rebel commander stood tall, radio at his hip-soaked beret, dripping into his eyes. He barked commands to the remaining shooters and turned toward the final failsafe, a secondary wired explosive hidden in a nearby tree hollow. His fingers reached for the trigger switch, until a shadow dropped behind him. Musa. Their bodies collided mid-splash, the trigger box flung into the mud. The commander cursed in dialect, slammed Musa against a tree trunk, fists flying. The man was strong, military-trained. He pulled a combat blade from his belt and lunged. Musa dodged left, barely missing the arc of steel. Pain bloomed in his ribs as a kick landed, but he countered with a palm to the chin and a brutal knee to the gut. The two men grappled in the storm, slipping, grunting, trading blows in a deadly dance. The blade nicked Musa's forearm, but he twisted the rebel's wrist, disarming him, then delivered a final strike to the solar plexus that dropped the man hard into the mud. Chest-heaving, hands bloody, Musa retrieved the switch and crushed it underfoot. It was over. No signal. No explosion. Down the hill, the security team swept into action, neutralizing the last of the panicked rebels who had been thrown into disarray by Musa's attack. As the third SUV opened its armored door, President Traoré stepped out surrounded by agents, but his eyes went straight to the muddy ridge. There, limping, slightly bruised but standing, was Musa Kabore. For a long moment, neither man said a word. Then Traoré stepped forward, rain streaking down his face like ink on stone. "You didn't just stop an attack," he said quietly. "You stopped a war." Musa lowered his eyes. "Not redemption," he replied, voice hoarse. "Just responsibility. Long overdue." Traoré nodded. "Same thing sometimes." Behind them, the sky cracked open with distant thunder. But within the clearing, there was a strange stillness, a kind of fragile, exhausted peace. And within it, the ghost of a soldier finally found breath again. The rain had begun to ease. What was once a roaring curtain of storm had softened into a quiet drizzle, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Smoke curled gently from scattered brush fires smothered by the downpour. The clearing moments ago, a battlefield, now looked like the wreckage of a bad memory trying to fade. Musa stood at the edge of the wreckage, soaked through to the bone shirt torn at the shoulder, dried blood at his temple, and a deep bruise forming beneath his jaw. One hand gripped his ribs, the other hung limp, but he stood tall, unmoving, waiting. Across the clearing, President Traoré approached, slowly surrounded by stunned guards who had no idea what to make of what they had just witnessed. Some still held rifles, drawn, unsure if the man before them was hero or traitor, ghost or guardian. But Traoré didn't hesitate. He stopped just a few feet from Musa. Musa straightened as best he could, eyes locked forward, and for the first time in years, he raised his hand in a proper military salute. The gesture was stiff, awkward, even, but undeniably honest. A salute not from duty, but from something older, older than betrayal, older than doubt, from belief. A long silence followed. Then Traoré stepped forward not to return the salute, but to grasp Musa's hand and pull it down gently, clasping it tight between his own. No medals, no cameras, no applause. Just one hand reaching for another. Musa's fingers trembled. No words were exchanged, none were needed, until Traoré leaned in voice just above the hush of drizzle and cinders. You kept your promise. Musa swallowed hard. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Only a sharp exhale, half a sob, half a laugh, like someone finally breathing after being underwater too long. I owed you that, he whispered. Traoré shook his head. You owed no one anything, but you gave everything. Behind them, the agents slowly lowered their weapons. A few exchanged glances. Others simply stood still, absorbing what had just unfolded. The man they once called traitor had saved the very leader he was accused of betraying. By late afternoon, the sun broke through the cloud cover, sending fractured beams of light across the clearing. Emergency convoys had arrived, extracting weapons, tagging rebels, patching wounds. But Musa remained. He refused a medic, refused the armored car waiting. Instead, he stood beside the scorched husk of a rebel truck, watching as a small boy, one of the orphans from Benora, was pulled from a hiding spot nearby, eyes wide with fear. The child looked up at him, clutching a satchel filled with stolen rations. Musa knelt slowly, painfully, held out a hand. It's over, he said gently. You're safe now. The child hesitated, then took his hand. The past didn't dissolve. It didn't forget. But maybe, just maybe, it had stopped punishing. Later that evening, as the last of the soldiers filed out and night crept over the land, Musa stood alone under a tree by the road. The convoy had left without him on his request. Traoré had looked back unsure. You're not coming, I will, Musa had answered. But I need to walk this last part. Why? Because that's how you return, Musa said quietly, one step at a time. And so he walked, boots pressing into damp earth, past the cratered bridge, past the broken foliage, past the bloodstains, and into the long road ahead. The sun was high over Ouagadougou, clear skies, no helicopters, no sirens. Just silence, expectant, collective, electric. Thousands gathered in front of the presidential palace. Streets overflowed with citizens waving faded flags, holding their breath. There was no official announcement, no televised broadcast. But the city knew something was coming, something rare. From behind the palace's arched doors, President Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. His beige shirt was soaked at the collar with sweat sleeves rolled up, not dressed to impress, but to speak. His eyes scanned the crowd. They were tired eyes, not defeated, but human. Then Musa stepped out beside him. No military uniform, no medals. Just a simple white cotton shirt, his posture stiff but sure. A bandage wrapped his hand. The crowd rippled, murmurs breaking like waves. Some gasped, some frowned, some smiled, but no one booed. Traoré raised a hand. The square hushed. I know what you're thinking, he began, voice clear and calm. You're wondering why a traitor stands beside your president. He let it hang. Let the discomfort settle. But let me tell you a truth, trust can break. But it can also heal. That healing begins when one man admits his wrong and another chooses to forgive. He turned to Musa briefly, then back to the crowd. Musa Kabor took a bullet from me once. Then he nearly took my life. But in the moment when our nation faced collapse, he stood between us and chaos. Traoré paused. He didn't fire to kill. He fired to warn. He betrayed, yes. But then he chose again. He chose to protect. The murmurs grew louder, no longer confusion, but conversation, recalculation, humanity surfacing through judgment. Traoré pointed to Musa. He stands here today, not as a soldier, not as a hero, not as a traitor. He stands here as a citizen, one who fell, one who rose. If we want to rebuild our nation, we must learn to do the same. Musa bowed his head, not in shame, not in show, but in quiet understanding. And the crowd began to clap. Not all, not loud, but enough. It was a beginning. Deep within the palace vault, behind biometric locks, reinforced steel, and layers of forgotten protocols, sat a suitcase. Black, leather, untouched since the day it was seized from a rebel checkpoint. Inside $1 million in crisp foreign bills, the cost of one shot. Musa stood in front of it. No guards escorted him, No camera watched, just the hum of filtered air and the cold fluorescent lights bouncing off polished tile. He didn't open it, didn't need to. He reached out fingers brushing the leather edge. It was cold. This was almost my soul's price, he whispered. But I never cashed it. He let his hand rest there a second longer, not to reminisce, not to tempt, just to remind himself of what he'd almost become. Then quietly he turned away. As he exited the vault, his mind drifted not to the bridge, not to the battlefield, but to Benora. In the memory, the sky was bright and blue, children laughing in a dusty courtyard. Musa knelt in the garden beside two orphans, one clutching a wooden trowel too big for her hand, the other trying to dig holes using a spoon. No, Musa had said with a chuckle. The seed goes first, then the water, then the waiting. How long do we wait? The boy asked. As long as it takes. He remembered their faces, sunlight on cheeks smeared with dirt, hands outstretched toward the future. He remembered feeling peace, purpose, not from holding a gun, but from planting something that would outlive him. That memory stayed with him as he closed the vault door behind him. The suitcase remained sealed, a relic of the man he could have been but no longer was. The road to Benora was as rugged as ever, potholes still carved into the red clay. Chickens still darted across the narrow paths. But when Musa stepped off the bus, backpack slung over one shoulder, chalkboard slats peeking from a satchel, he was greeted not by fear or skepticism, but by a small girl running to hug him. You came back, she said, beaming. Musa nodded. I said I would. He walked past the rebuilt water pump, past the new tin roof clinic still smelling of wet paint, and into the foundation of the Benora Learning House, a one-room school built from woodstone and perseverance. Inside, benches were lined with notebooks. The alphabet was painted crookedly across the back wall, and sunlight filtered through the shuttered windows, catching dust motes like drifting stars. Musa picked up a piece of chalk and began writing on the board, choice. The children gathered in front of him, curious, barefoot, fidgeting. He turned to them. Do you know what this word means? Silence. Then one boy raised a hand. It means picking something? Musa smiled. Yes, but also more. It means power. Even when the world pushes you, scares you, tempts you, you still get to choose. And every time you choose the right thing, even when it's hard, you grow stronger. He paused, stepped forward. I was a soldier. I made bad choices. I almost hurt someone who trusted me. But I also made good choices. And today I choose this. He looked around the classroom, to build, to teach, to give back. One child raised her hand. Is that what honor is? Musa knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. Honor isn't earned once, he said. It's earned every day you choose light over shadow. The children nodded, some understanding, some still puzzled, but all listening. And as the lesson began, letters, numbers, songs, Musa felt something deeper than forgiveness. He felt rebirth. This story isn't just about betrayal and redemption. It's about the quiet power of choice. Musa's journey reminds us that even when we fall, even when the world labels us lost, we still hold the power to rewrite our path. Forgiveness, especially from a leader like Traoré, takes immense strength not to forget the past, but to believe in a better future. It shows that healing a broken nation begins not with revenge, but with courage, humility, and trust, rebuilt one action at a time. In a world so quick to judge, this story asks us to pause and ask, what if we gave each other one more chance? What if we chose compassion over condemnation and growth over guilt? Sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is simply choose the light again and again. Now I'm curious, if someone you trusted deeply once failed you, would you have the strength to forgive like Traoré did? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.